Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're here taking a look at the Rhodesian South African Mamba pistol. And when this came out, hoo boy, was it the big thing. The marketing campaign behind this was tremendous. They were really huge amount of publicity. This was going to be the best pistol in the world, bar none. It turns out it's actually pretty much the worst pistol in the world, bar very few. So where did it go wrong? What happened? Well, the origin of this begins in about 1977, basically in a bar in Salisbury, Rhodesia, where a bunch of dudes are sitting around and they start they start discussing, like, what's the best combat pistol? What's the best carry pistol? Semi-auto pistol. And of course, there are a ton of different opinions, and they keep shooting bull about this and end up writing down like a list of what everyone agrees, or sort of agrees, are the best characteristics of a combat pistol on a little, a bar napkin. One of these guys, a guy named by the name of Bob Waite, is actually a professional draftsman, and he's intellectually stimulated by this plan, and so he goes home and starts working on actually turning this list of elements into an actual conceptual pistol design. And actually comes through with it. Turns up a pistol designed based on this. At some point, an American expat by the name of Joe Hale, living in Rhodesia, gets wind of it and thinks this is a cool idea, and so he kind of wedges his way into this project, exerts some influence on it, and later on, a third guy by the name of Roy Jackson gets hands on the design, or is shown the design, and he also thinks this is cool. He thinks it has potential, and he is actually an employee of a company called Sandock Austral, based in one of the rougher parts of Johannesburg, and they're an engineering and manufacturing company. And he looks at this and goes, well, this is pretty cool, and my company back home, we have all the capacity necessary to manufacture it. So he takes this proposal back to his management, and they're already involved in the arms industry in other ways, and they think it's also a good idea, and so they go ahead and sign a contract and take on the responsibility of manufacturing the Mamba pistol. And there are a number of things that are going to be revolutionary about it. It's entirely made of stainless steel. It was going to have no stamped parts in it at all, very high quality. And that's where some of the things started to go wrong. Apparently, one of the primary problems here is the heat treating. Now, there was a clause in the contract that gave Joe Hale, for some inexplicable reason, complete control over the technical aspects of the pistol, including things like the heat treat regimen. And Hale ended up insisting on a 24-hour carburizing cycle for heat treating the stainless steel parts. And it didn't work. And despite the fact that it clearly didn't work, they stuck with it. Hale insisted on it, and the contract required them to defer to him on things like that. And as a result, there was substantial galling in these pistols, like all of them, all the production guns. They simply didn't work. In fact, there was a magazine in South Africa called Magnum that was very interested in doing an article on these when they came out. Of course, there was this huge marketing hype and publicity about them. And when Magnum finally got their test pistol, they went out and did some shooting, and the gun didn't work. And so they went back to the company, and they said, well, the gun doesn't work. And they were given 2 more guns instead. Oh, no big deal. There must be something weird. Well, take it back. We'll just give you another one. At that point, by the way, they had produced a grand total of 17 production guns. Well, the 2 replacement ones also didn't work. And so a lot of our information on the real information on the gun comes from that magazine and the guys who were trying to report on what they thought was like the greatest new pistol in the world that turns out to have been largely, I don't know, scam is quite the right word, or just tremendous failure, but some blend of those two things. At any rate, we're in like 1978 here. They did hand make a few that worked. There were 11 prototypes, and I think between the prototypes and some of the early production guns, they put together some really nice ones. Like, as part of the marketing, they manufactured a number of gold-plated guns. They actually gave away a gold-plated Mamba as the prize for the winner of, I believe, the 1978 World IPSC Championships. And apparently that gun actually did work. It was hand-fitted, it was properly heat-treated. But the production ones just never did. And while the company was attempting to work out the problems with the heat treat and get, it's not just technical problems, it's also political problems within the company, getting people to agree to do things that work instead of things that don't work. Well, as this was happening, the manufacturing guys, Sandock Austral, they ended up getting another contract, totally unrelated, to develop armored cars for the South African military. And they took a look at the Mamba and went, this thing is clearly going nowhere. And they took the factory floor space that had been devoted to the Mamba, they turned into an R&D office for this armored car contract. And that was basically the end of the Mamba. The parts that had been made, the guns that had been made, the IP, the patents, if there were patents on it, everything was sold as a batch to Navy Arms of New Jersey in the US, a guy named Val Forget. Forget planned to manufacture Mambas entirely in the US in New Jersey, and that plan never came to fruition, never happened. They may have assembled, I think they probably did assemble a few guns in the US from parts, but they were all the parts that had been made in South Africa, and they had all the same problems, and so none of the American assembled guns work any better than the South African assembled ones. If we look at this in terms of just the basic mechanics, this is a double-action semi-automatic pistol. It is largely based on the Smith Wesson Model 59, which is in turn based on the Browning High Power. This uses the magazine release button there. The magazine is based on the Smith & Wesson 59. It might actually be interchangeable, but I don't have a Smith mag here to test that. So, 15 round standard capacity. The guns that did actually shipped with one magazine. It has an ambidextrous safety here, which, interestingly, you cannot engage unless you pull the hammer back and then engage it. On this one, it won't actually stay engaged either, but that's supposed to be how the safety operates. The idea was you didn't want, because this is a super tactical gun, you didn't want the safety to be accidentally engaged in combat and get you killed on the street, so to speak. Sights are pretty typical of a 1970s combat pistol. Not great, but they are there. Now on the production guns, and the prototypes actually, they're all marked Model 1 right here over the trigger guard, and then they will also have South African proofs up here, and they'll have a serial number over on this side of the frame. And this particular gun is almost certainly one that was assembled from parts after the end of production because it doesn't have any of those markings. In order to disassemble this, basically the same as a high power type, 1911 Browning type, we're going to pull the slide all the way back and then pull this cross pin out, if we can. There we go. All right. With that pin out, then the slide is going to come off the front. And then once the slide is off, you can pull the spring. It's interesting to note that apparently in this whole list of a bunch of smart guys thinking what was the best way to make an automatic pistol, a captive mainspring didn't make the list. And then pull the barrel out. I mentioned that the magazine and the operating system were based on the Smith & Wesson 59, so is the barrel. I don't know that this is actually a Smith & Wesson 59 barrel, but it is it is basically identical in design. So linkless tilting barrel. You can see it's got one big locking lug there, which fits into one locking lug in the slide. All right, I don't know if you guys can really see it. There we go. This has like 24 groove micro groove rifling in the barrel, and according to the publicity campaign, that was because it improved velocity and it was more accurate and it was better in all sorts of ways. In reality, it was because the company making the barrels didn't have a rifling machine, and so what they did is they had a hardened, basically a hardened broach or a hardened tool that they ran through the barrel on a lathe, and that they were able to cut shallow, narrow rifling. They weren't able to cut like full profile traditional rifling, and so that's why they rifled it the way they did. In addition, remember, they claimed no stamped parts in the gun, and what they did instead was make all cast parts. So allegedly, even the barrels are castings. Now, assuming that's true, they did do proper finish machining on the barrels, because I'm not seeing a lot of casting marks. It's also possible that they imported Smith & Wesson 59 barrels, maybe, although South Africa and Rhodesia were under international embargo at the time, so probably not. If we look at the slide, the casting marks are very clearly evident. You can see them there in the top of the slide. If we look at the hood there in front of the barrel, you've got some really obvious casting, surface flaws. This is all one continuous piece. That's the nice thing about a casting. So there's they machined back the front here, and there's just a little step up into the breech face. A few of these guns have been noted with external high-power type extractors, but the standard production variety had an internal 1911 pattern extractor held in place with a retaining plate, just like a 1911. You can see some additional obvious casting marks in the frame there. There's a seam right at the bottom of the frame right there. If we look very closely in the bottom of the frame right there, there is a number stamped or scribed, that's 151. We have that same number electro-penciled on the inside of the slide here, and we actually have it nicely stamped on the left side of the barrel. So serial number of this particular gun is 151, although we're pretty sure it's still a parts bin gun, as it doesn't have any of the external markings. Now, I suspect that they probably started the serial numbers at 100, and this would be the 51st gun made. If we take the grips off, which I have, we can see one of the other legitimately neat features about the gun, although it's a little bit questionable practicality, and that is it actually has an adjustable mainspring. So I can take this and just pop that off there, and then we have a hammer spring strut, which, by the way, is definitely a stamped part, contrary to their claims. But then more importantly, the bottom cap that holds the spring on is threaded, and you can adjust its depth from that down to that, which does allow you to actually adjust the tension on the hammer spring. The grip on the Mamba is really pretty awkward to hold. It has this like completely flat front face that is uncomfortable, and the grip is large in general. And I think part of that comes from the fact that as a casting, it has to have pretty thick walls here on the grip. If this were stamped sheet metal, these walls could be a heck of a lot thinner, and that would actually, it doesn't take a lot of reduction to get yourself a fairly noticeable change in feel. So the casting led to this being thick and having an uncomfortably large grip. The other alternative claim about the grip on the Mamba is that it was designed this way with a flat face because Joe Hale wanted it to force you to hold it in the correct manner, which would be with the flat of your fingers here. I think it's worth pointing out that this is, in fact, objectively the incorrect way to hold the pistol. You want to have it rotated farther around in your hand, which is rather uncomfortable. Joe Hale is really kind of an infamous blowhard of the Rhodesian firearms industry, with association to a lot of projects that did not go very well. Normally, notches cut in a gun reflect kills. In this case, I think this means this has fired 3 shots successfully. There were a couple other variants that were discussed but never actually produced. They talked about a 2-shot version. It was called something like the double tap model. Had a lightened slide so that in theory you had less muzzle climb, and it actually had a 2-round burst trigger. So, your classic IPSC double tap. Remember, this is a pistol conceived of by a bunch of guys who are basically expat, Rhodesian, IPSC combat shooter sorts of guys. The classic double tap, well, you can do that with 1 trigger pull. Very cool. Conceptualized, never actually produced. There was also a 3-round burst version. Then pictures of that one actually got into a bunch of the media about the gun. That was specifically created by Joe Hale, and it was a complete fraud. They actually just drilled a hole and mounted a fake selector switch in the slide along with an external extractor and called it the 3-round burst version, which never actually existed. So in reality, all of the Mambas there are 2 versions. There are some of the prototypes with wood grips, and there's the standard gun with plastic grips, but mechanically they're identical. Total produced, maybe as many as 100, but that's kind of doubtful. So that was pretty much the end of it. The project went to New Jersey, and then died. There are very few of these left anywhere because, well, they didn't work very well and they didn't make very many in the first place. So a cool example of a pistol that had a ton of hype and a really spectacularly exploding epic fail of reality. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to stay tuned tomorrow for another cool forgotten weapon, and thanks for watching.